Welcome back to the Spicy Take Sports Podcast. I'm Elijah with Caleb and Colton, and we are actually starting up right now the first episode of the only college football version of the Spicy Take Sports Podcast. This allows us to kind of dig into a little bit more depth on certain topics for college football, and also we're going to do another one for the NFL later on this week. It also allows the viewers to watch both that they like, which we love that. But if you're into one or the other, you don't have to worry about getting the other stuff. So you can get the spicy takes and what you wanted to listen to. Today, we're going to go ahead and recap this past week in college football, some of the main news stories and a couple of the main news stories that really kind of have longer lasting effects. We're also going to go through the AP Top 25 and talk about who we think is ranked too high and too low. And we're going to get to some predictions for next week's games, as well as some early Heisman favorites. So the first story of the week, I feel like, is the Clay Helton gone at USC. Obviously, USC is a top tier job. Clay Helton's performances weren't bad, but weren't USC quality. And the Stanford game was the nail in the coffin. That was ugly. So I was looking at some different speculations. There was no sources behind it, but of coaches that could be available. And the number one name I felt like that really showed up was Luke Fickle as the most interesting name. What are y'all's thoughts? Do you think that you would leave Cincinnati that's going to the Big 12 to go to USC that's obviously in a little bit of a rebuilding stage, but also is freaking USC?
I think if I was Fickle, I think I'd leave because it's a lot easier to get into, even with those expectations that USC has. You're talking about a talent pool that you can pull from so quickly and easily because it's such a recognizable brand. I mean, USC is one of the top 5 recognizable teams in the country, I'd say, for college football. So he doesn't really have to worry about recruiting pull there. He's going to get it just by school recognition. And also on the detraction side of the Cincinnati job, it's going to be a problem because it's going to be a lot harder to go and have winning seasons moving up, where he's going to be playing teams like, Oklahoma and other Big 12 schools that are going to give him problems versus playing people like, Tulane. So I think that if I was Fickle, I think it would honestly be, if he's looking for an easier job, I guess, something a little more cushy. I guess that just depends what his goals are. But if I was looking for the easier job and the one that I think I could have more success at while also being a bigger name, I would go to USC.
Yeah, so we discussed earlier in terms of, coaches like Scott Frost, where you can easily go from a non-Power 5 conference and you're doing so well to go to a school like in your alma mater, Nebraska, which is also, you can kind of consider them blue blood in a way. I mean, Nebraska was a team in the 90s. USC was basically one of the teams in the early 2000s. So if you can go to a team and produce, it'd be nice if you can get them to buy in. But Southern Cal is definitely one of those teams. I mean, it's going to be, I can see both. I can definitely see Fickle staying at Cincinnati and trying to see what he can do in the Big 12. And he knows what he has at Cincinnati. He doesn't know what he has at USC, but he is a fairly good recruiter. He can definitely get a lot out of his recruit. So with that said, I really think he has a really intense decision to make. If I was in that situation, I don't know what I'd roll with. But I'd probably go to USC, just start over with a Power 5 school that has all the resources you have to succeed. And if he's as good a coach as he seems to be, USC is going to be in good hands.
I think for me, the story is patience. USC's got the glitz and glamour. They've got the money. They've got Los Angeles. They've got the blue blood status. They've got everything. They've got the history. They do. My thing is Clay Helton was thought of as a really good young coach when he got extended a couple years ago. And a few years later, he's fired 2 weeks into the season. And most people were shocked he got through the offseason. And my issue with Fickle is if you don't have patience to develop the program back to what it used to be, you could be out of a job very soon when, in my opinion, Ryan Day is going to go to the NFL within the next 2 or 3 years. And with you being in Ohio already, you already having that recruiting base in Ohio, and you add the Ohio State name to yourself, I'm pretty sure he'd be the number one guy for Ohio State to go after. So I'm not leaving Cincinnati unless that Ohio State job opens up, because I just don't think obviously Ohio State's not going to be patient, but I feel like Ohio State's in a lot better state of a program right now than USC currently is. And you won't need as much patience going to an Ohio State that already's got top 5 recruiting classes coming in every year instead of top 10 to 15 recruiting classes every year, but expected to produce at the same level.
Yeah, it wouldn't be as much as a rebuild if he went to Ohio State as he did USC. I mean, what happens if Ryan Day does decide to stay at Ohio State for years and Fickle just misses out on that Power 5 job that he really wants? I mean, I'm sure he'll get several opportunities, but USC is probably like maybe a top 12, top 15 head coaching job in America, just with their resources and their tradition and their school as is. I mean, that's not an opportunity you want to skip out on.
I mean, obviously, the coaching carousel in college football is the most fun things because
What happens all the
talking
time.
about this, and then you could literally see a random job open up. That's like you could see a job like I don't think this is going to happen, but say a Clemson that opens up because Dabo is like, I don't expect that ever to happen, but it could happen at any point. I don't think anyone expected Urban Meyer to be in the NFL this year. So that's one of the cool things. I mean, right now, I would say I wouldn't leave if I'm Fickle, but if the opportunity is too good to pass up, I mean, you could easily see it being a possibility.
Most definitely.
I think now the next story I think we're going to go into is going to be Florida State and kind of their complete and total just
meltdown. Meltdown, I guess, would be the best word to describe it. That was just pitiful.
I mean, we went from saying that Florida State could be having the best year they've had since Francois got hurt, and they went 9-10-3 that year, the year before. We're saying that could be the best year they're going to have since then. And then a week later, they lose to Jacksonville State. So it's
I just don't think they have heart anymore. I don't know. I mean, I know they keep switching coaches. Sometimes it's not always just about the coaches, because they keep bringing in coaches into teams that still have a high percentage of players who are vets. And we were trying to bring a new coach in with a bunch of vets. They still kind of come into that same old mentality. They just look like the same old Seminoles who just kind of have that blank stare in their eyes after they give up a big play, and just like it's normal at this point. They've normalized failure when Florida State never normalized failure in the early 2000s or the 2010s, back when they had Jameis.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember going to I'm not a Florida State fan, but I remember going to the Florida State game the year that Jameis Winston won the Heisman. And I mean, just they've done a complete 180 since then. I mean, obviously they won a national title, but they're just 0-2, lost to FCS school. They were 97-0 going into that game against FCS schools.
They needed someone like a Derwin James in that game to galvanize them. And I just don't think they have those kind of leaders right now.
Yeah, they don't. I mean, they're just, in the last several years, Florida State has just been losing. I mean, they haven't lost FCS schools, but they've lost to schools, they've been favored by 10, 14 points consistently. So
they've had close calls before. I feel like this is a long time coming for like the last 4 years.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely since they've been on this slump for years. I mean, who would you say right now is in a better situation? Would you say Tennessee's in a better situation than Florida State currently?
Josh Heupel's a crap coach. Like I'm coming from a UCF fan's perspective. Josh Heupel is not a good football coach, and that's why I think Tennessee's in deep crap. I think Danny White's a great AD, so they could. If they move on from Heupel in a couple of years, they could be in better shape. But the thing is, I think that Danny White and Heupel are virtually tied to the hip, like they were at UCF, and that's what I'm worried. That's why I think Tennessee's in a really bad situation. Florida State, I really do believe a lot of it's just coaching. I know that they've changed coaches a bunch, but look at the type of guys they're going after. The thing that made this team fall apart completely was Jimbo Fisher going to Texas A&M. You lose a top 5 to top 10 coach, and you're going after the top group of 5 coach. I'm coming from a group of 5 fan, and I'm sorry, but we've seen what's happened when you have a Scott Frost go to the Power 5, when you have, especially to go to a struggling program in the Power 5.
Mike Norvell from
Mike Norvell
really good school at
Memphis, out of Florida State. Like just guys like that, and or Major Applewhite going from Houston, like at Houston, and then you have Tom Herman from Houston to Texas, like guys like that just don't do well at these big name programs that are at a downturn. The only way those guys are going to be successful, which is the only reason I said that I think that the only way that I'm Fickle, I'm leaving, is if I'm going to a Ohio State. That's the only reason I'm doing that, because I feel like coaching means so much, and getting a guy that I think a lot of these Power 5 players don't buy into, coming up from a group of 5 program to be the coach, I really do think it's a lot of it, because as Caleb said, it's the heart that you're seeing. They just don't have it. It's just
they don't have the right culture at Florida State. I mean, they just haven't had that culture in years. I mean, I'd say, yeah, since probably Francois was the quarterback at Florida State for the last time you really saw them passionate about their program.
Yeah. Well, next we're going to go ahead and jump into the top 25. Maybe just released their top 25 polls, and top 3 stay the same: Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma. 4 now Oregon. I think it's hard to really argue that for them knocking off Ohio State. I think they might be a little bit, and that was without Thibodeau.
I mean, we're talking week 2. You know what I mean? There's going to be overreactions in the AP 25 early on because of big wins or something. But I think because of that, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I mean,
and then Iowa they're ranked 5th now. I mean, they beat that game wasn't as close as it really was with Iowa.
I thought Iowa should be ranked. I mean, if I had to nitpick, I would put Iowa a little bit higher because they've beaten 2 ranked teams.
I'd put Iowa 4. I would. Well, actually, I would probably put Iowa 3, because I've not been impressed that much with Oklahoma this year.
Neither have I.
I mean, if you're talking about what they've done this year, I would go Alabama, Georgia, Iowa, Oregon, Oklahoma.
Yeah. Texas A&M's been steady. I mean,
they got the Colorado game was kind of ugly, but the offense was awful. Defense was good. How long? I don't know how long.
I mean, Colorado is a truly underrated program, though, in my opinion. I mean, we could talk about that for another 30 minutes, but I feel like Colorado turns out NFL talent on a yearly basis, whether it be at cornerback or David Bakhtiari, for example, is a Colorado alumni. There's more than a few good players that come out of Colorado on a yearly basis.
And one of Jacksonville's top receivers, Chenault Jr. I mean, he's pretty good. I mean, he came from Colorado. They produce at least 1 or 2 solid players a year coming into the NFL. So, right, like you said, fairly underrated program. I mean, but at the same time, Texas A&M, I mean, they're not really showing me anything. I mean, granted, their quarterback did get hurt in the second quarter. He's out until mid-October.
Is that how long he's out for? I knew it was a pretty bad-looking injury. I didn't know how bad it was actually going to be, though.
Yeah, they say Haynes King's out for at least 4 to 5 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know that I hate ranking teams based off of injuries, but that's why I think I would probably drop A&M a little bit. I think A&M should drop. I'd probably have them below Cincinnati and probably below Penn State. Penn State looked rough against Wisconsin offensively. They looked really good against Ball State. I know it's Ball State, but they're a pretty good group of 5 program. So I can see that. I do think that Florida at 11, obviously they're playing Alabama this week. We'll get to that. But that's going to be, I think that team literally is, with Emory Jones at quarterback, is probably it's like a low 20s ranked team in the country. I think with Richardson, they could be anywhere from being a top 5 program if he's as good as it looks like he's going to be. But also he's a freshman, so he could fall off. So what did you all think about thoughts about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think Richardson, I mean, what I've seen from him, the kind of highlights I've seen here and there, I mean, he looks a lot better than Emory Jones. Emory Jones has only thrown 2 touchdown passes all season, and Stetson Bennett at Georgia threw 4 in basically 1 quarter. Quarter in 2 minutes. So
Richardson I think he got hurt in practice though. I read here or something like that, so it's
Really?
questionable whether he'll play next week.
I was thinking he could be like potential the X factor against Alabama. Like if I was him, I would have played him. Well, obviously I'd probably just started Emory Jones, but we can talk about that later.
He is apparently going to play. He is apparently going to practice this week, according to
Okay.
Dan Mullen. So that could
That's
be
good.
big.
Still, if he's not fully healthy, going against Alabama is never a great timing to do it. But as long as, I feel like for Florida's goal should be to just not lose by like 20.
Yeah.
That sounds horrible. And of course, I guess if you're Dan Mullen, you got to convince your team you have a chance to win, and you want to come in for that. But as a Florida fan, and if I'm Dan Mullen, I'm just thinking to myself, if I do not get my doors blown off, if I look like I made Alabama break a sweat trying to beat me, that's a huge win. Any team, pretty much any team that makes Alabama break a sweat is the second best team in the college football at that point,
Mhm.
Basically, last year Florida looked like the second best team in the SEC championship game. They had a chance late to beat Alabama.
Who
Yeah.
knows?
lost by
Maybe
only
they do win
6.
that. Maybe they do win that if they're coming out there with a bunch of intensity. Because with the LSU loss right before that, if they win that game, because if Marco Wilson doesn't just be an idiot and throw a shoe,
LSU.
if he doesn't throw that shoe, Florida's probably playing for a playoff spot right there.
Yeah.
So that's how close they were. So looking at the top 25, who do you think is the highest? Who do you think is ranked way too high? Do you think is ranked too low? I know like one team. I know for me personally, I think the Iowa is too low. I think they should be top. I think they should be third in the country because I personally don't like preseason rankings too much. I think it was kind of just based all off of speculation. And if you're talking about what they've done this year, Iowa has looked like the dominant team against 2 top 25 opponents back-to-back weeks. And then too low, too high. I think I'd probably say, not that I don't think this team is good. I just worry that I think that they're getting kind of hyped up too quick because of one win. UCLA at 13, I think is a bit of a stretch. I think they should be in the top 25. I just don't think that high.
Just to comment on that real quickly, though, the teams they're around, though, I feel like they deserve to be in that same echelon of Notre Dame. Iowa State sitting there at 14, and they're 1-1, and they got they got handily defeated by Iowa. I guess you can take that as you will. So
I guess that's part of the reason I said I don't like preseason rankings, because I would have a couple of these other teams like Ole Miss. I would have Ole Miss above any of those teams. I think they're low as well, but I just don't like preseason rankings. What about you, Caleb?
Well, the one that I think is too high. I would also agree that Oklahoma's too high at 3. That's I don't think that's spicy, to be honest. I think everyone kind of thinks that they're too high when you read stuff. When I was reading stuff on Bleacher Report, the general consensus is Spencer Rattler hasn't come out looking as good as people thought he was going to, and they're kind of sitting there at that ranking because people don't know what to do with them. But I think first opportunity they get where they take an L, they'll drop down, and they'll drop down far. So for like more of a controversial one, why is Ohio State at 9 at 1-1 where they barely won one game against a team without their best running back for most of it, and then they lost and really never looked like they had any chance against Oregon. The game was a lot closer than what it really was. They were overrated from the very beginning when you're coming in with a new quarterback. Ohio State should be at like number 15 right now. They should be Virginia Tech right now, not
I think
not at number 9.
I know what they're thinking. I know they're thinking that that it's really, really hard to drop a team after losing a game against the number 12 team in the country, who's now number 4. I get that, but I agree with you. I think Ohio State, I think if they showed signs and it was just a really hard fought game all the way to the end and said that you had signs, if they blew out Minnesota or something like that, I could see them being at 9 at 1-1. But I agree that them being at 9 may be a bit high.
Yeah, I don't blame them, but we're called the Spicy Takes podcast for a reason, so I try and give something. So, and then for too low, this is not spicy at all. I'll make the other one spicy. Ole Miss. I don't think it's spicy. Ole Miss has looked really good.
Mhm.
I don't think they're the second best team in the SEC. I think Georgia clearly is, but I could see Ole Miss by the end of the year being in the top 8, maybe top 6.
Mhm.
Probably not, because they're going to take L's against some of those better teams, and that's not really their fault. It's just going to mess up their rankings. But I think they're, based on merit, they're a top 8 team, not win record, but based on merit. What about you, Colton?
I mean, Matt
Sorry,
Corral
I
looks
mute
really
my
good.
mic. So for me, who I think is too high, this could be a little spicy. I think it's pretty fair, but I think Notre Dame potentially should be 0-2 right now. They
Yeah.
just barely escaped at home against Toledo. Had to get a last-second drive to win that game. And then they almost lost to Florida State in Doak Campbell Stadium, where Jacksonville State just won. So I think 12 for Notre Dame is still a little high. I mean, they did drop 4 spots this past week in the rankings, but I mean, in my opinion, they're barely even a top 20 team right this second.
Mhm.
And who I think is maybe too low, I mean, I may be getting ahead of myself. This may be a little spicy, but I mean, Arkansas at 20, I wouldn't mind them being like, 15th or 14th. I mean, I can see them even a little higher. I mean, I was very impressed by Arkansas. Maybe Texas is a little over. Texas isn't even ranked anymore. But I mean, hey, it's supposed to be a little spicy. So, but I mean, we'll see. Arkansas plays Texas A&M in about 2 weeks, and I'll be at least a top 18 versus about 7. So we'll see how that game goes. See if my prediction of Arkansas being legit is true or not.
I will say, obviously, I'm a little bit biased from someone that's from Tennessee, Kentucky line. As a Kentucky fan, Kentucky right now, they're ranked, looks like 33, 34, something like that, in their receiving votes. I mean, they've had a really good win against Missouri. I know Missouri didn't look great by any stretch, and they could be. But I feel like in the preseason, when it came to predictions about who they like at the SEC East, you had kind of a 3-way race. You had like a 3 or 4 team race 3-way race pretty much between Kentucky, Missouri, and Florida is going to be the second team in the SEC East. And Missouri, I mean, Kentucky was dominating that game. They blew it in the second half and almost lost the game. But to have them below teams like Miami, that has looked really bad this year. Like Miami being ranked while TCU, UCF, Liberty, Kentucky, Michigan State, those teams aren't ranked is kind of not a really good look from my opinion. Even with Wisconsin as well. I mean, they didn't look good either. So
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a joke. Miami, I mean, I know Alabama's the number 1 team in the country, but I mean, I think a few teams can give them a really run for their money just because, I mean, that first game they played Miami did not look like the 14th team in the country. I mean, they looked awful.
no.
I mean, they escaped against App State. I mean, App State is, a pretty good Power 5 school, but still, I mean, game shouldn't have been that close.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's go ahead and hop into next week's games. It's kind of a down week compared to the last couple of weeks, and we don't have a Georgia, Clemson, or an Oregon, Ohio State. I mean, there's some really good games, but there's still some really intriguing matchups this week. I mean, you got your typical Nebraska, you got your Nebraska, Oklahoma, which on paper looks good, but if you looked at the rosters, they aren't the greatest. That was kind of supposed to be the top game of the week when the schedule was put together, and Nebraska looked really, really bad to start the year. So what are your all's top games this week? Let's say top two games, and then your upset pick for the week.
All right, Caleb,
Go ahead, Colton. I took second last time. You go.
Okay, so my top 2 games of the week, and I'm gonna go upset. So actually, no, I'm gonna go my upset's gonna be at number 1. So my upset is Auburn's going into Happy Valley and taking the win. That's my spicy take of the day. That's my official main spicy take.
Spicy.
Auburn's going in the Happy Valley and winning by 10 points.
That's a pretty
So
spicy take.
that's a spicy take. Very spicy.
That's
But I think two games have potential to be pretty good for the most part. I'm not picking these teams to win, but I think they'll be competitive for the majority of the game. is Virginia Tech versus West Virginia. I think, West Virginia is a pretty hard place to play. And they're 1-1, but they're still a pretty good school, Power 5 school that can almost beat anyone on any day. And Virginia Tech is a totally different team away from Blacksburg. So I think they'll give them a run for their money. And then Cincinnati at Indiana, I think that's a very intriguing matchup. Michael Penix Jr., he's a very explosive player. He hasn't really played that great this season. But maybe Cincinnati can be overlooking Indiana and maybe they can sneak up and see how that game goes. So there are a couple of intriguing matchups, but I think Auburn is looking pretty good. I don't think they're gonna be able to beat Georgia, Alabama, but I think they can win 9 or 10 games potentially.
So my 2 games are Michigan State and Miami, because we're talking about kind of programs that I think are on opposite swings. Like Miami tried to bring in talent to try and prop themselves up to go for a run, like bringing in what was the quarterback's name? I just lost it.
Derek King.
Yeah, Derek King. But they just have not looked good at all this year. And Michigan State has consistently been like a Big Ten bottom dweller now for the last couple of years, but they're starting to get a little better. They won their first 2 games. They're not nothing crazy, but beating Northwestern is always an achievement. Northwestern consistently upsets good teams in the Big Ten. So to beat them pretty handily was, I think, a big deal for Michigan State. And then they absolutely destroyed Youngstown State. Make sense of that, what you will. So I'm kind of interested to see that game, just to kind of see the direction of those programs, if Miami can right the ship or if Michigan State kind of keeps on that upward trend. And my second game is I'm interested to see the outcome of, let me find it here. I lost it for a second. There it is, Arizona State and BYU. Because BYU, it says, going on to Big 12. Arizona State, it kind of gets forgotten a little bit out there, but they've produced some NFL talent recently. And I think that coaching staff consistently gets the best out of their players. They're generally a hard out for good teams. And is BYU really a good team? Losing your starting quarterback, who just got drafted number 2 overall, is never easy. So I think that's a good test there. And my upset of the week, this is spicy, and I would not put money on this, but my upset pick of the week is Central Michigan over LSU. Central Michigan played.
Super spicy.
Yeah. Central Michigan played Missouri hard until Missouri just kind of started running them over at the very end. But it's back-to-back weeks for them now against SEC teams. They just saw an SEC team last week, and they realized that they could play with them. They didn't look stupid. LSU is offensively deficient. I could see it as long as they just don't go anywhere near LSU's cornerbacks and they just run the ball, do play action, and stay away from interceptions. I think Central Michigan could give LSU problems.
Is LSU in Baton Rouge, or are they back in Louisiana, or are they still on the road?
Oh wait, you're right.
Because of the hurricane, I wonder if they're still practicing
check
away.
that, yeah. Jim McElwain's the coach at Central Michigan, by the way.
He's no joke, and Central Michigan isn't any joke. Their linebacker core is really good for that level.
Yeah, I can't find where it's at. It says at LSU. but I'm not
LSU's
sure.
top running back that just got ruled academically ineligible, John
Mhm.
Emery Jr.
Yeah, he was a really high. He was a 5-star. He was one of the top backs in the country a year or 2 ago.
Yeah.
Mhm.
He's one of those guys that kind of like Zach Evans that just never really produced. 5-star that just can't really pan out. Had some issues.
I think it's supposed to be in Baton Rouge, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, because the Saints just played. Obviously, the Saints played Green Bay and Jacksonville, so I was just.
Yeah.
Well, for me, my top 2 games of the week. Well, actually, I'm gonna have my 3 games of the week are actually 3 upsets that I think are all gonna happen. So my number 1 game of the week in an upset, I think Fresno State upsets UCLA. Oregon just beat Ohio State
Anything's
at
possible.
Ohio State, and Fresno about beat Oregon. And again, as I said earlier, UCLA is, I think, overrated right now. I think being as high up in the top 25 as they are. And Fresno State has been one of the best group of 5 programs the last probably 5 to 10 years. And I just see that being an upset, especially after UCLA is kind of riding a high. Quite humbling losing to a team like Fresno State. My second upset and second game of the week is I think that San Diego State can upset Utah. They're at home. Utah has been not as good as I thought they could be this year so far. And San Diego State's always been one of the better group of 5 teams, especially on the ground. And a lot of those upsets that do happen are because teams are so dependent on the run game and they just run it down their throats and run the clock. So I think that could be a really good chance for an upset. And well, I take back that I would pick the third upset, but I could easily see it happening. I think Virginia could easily upset UNC. And that's saying a lot because beginning of the year, I thought North Carolina was a playoff dark horse, but they just looked really bad. Like
The wheels have fallen off that in the first 2 games. Yeah.
And then Virginia's given them trouble the last couple of years to begin with. They haven't beaten them, but they've come close. And I don't have any faith in North Carolina at this point. I don't even know how far they're expecting Sam Howell to fall down draft boards at this point. I don't know if it's him. I don't know if it's the team. I don't know if it's a combination of both. But right now, North Carolina looks really rough. I think they do beat Virginia, but I've lost a lot of faith in that being that easy of a game like I was expected. I know probably the biggest spicy take there would probably be the UCLA thing, but I think Central Michigan's a little bit spicier, but
No, this is just kind of like really random, but a game I see that has potential. I don't think it's gonna be an upset, but it's gonna kind of maybe can go into the third quarter. I mean, Purdue at Notre Dame, and Notre Dame has struggled. Obviously, their last 2 matchups with very good teams with a lot less talent than they have.
I could see that being upset for sure.
Purdue has been known to kind of slay the giant every once in a while. Just ask Ohio State. So, I mean, Notre Dame will probably take care of business, but it's just kind of like a game probably keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Well, what's up?
I would say we can go to Heisman favorites now.
Yep.
Yes,
So
sir.
last thing we're gonna do to this podcast is kind of giving your top 3 Heisman favorites. And going into this week, I can go ahead and start this one. I think number 1 right now, you kind of got to go Bryce Young. The guys looked dialed in the whole time. He's a freshman. I don't think he ends up winning it, but I think Heisman favorites, he's kind of got to be the top guy right now. I think number 2 has got to be Matt Corral. The guy is slinging it, and Ole Miss is looking fantastic. And third, I think Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati. If Cincinnati can go undefeated this year and they find a way to get in a playoff spot, I mean, with Ohio State losing a game, Clemson already losing a game, it's shaping up to where they possibly could get into the playoff. If they can find a way to make it into the playoffs, it'd be really hard to keep Desmond Ridder out of that Heisman conversation.
I mean, many experts already say that Clemson's basically out. They have 0 ranked teams left on their schedule until they get to the ACC championship if they get there.
And even then, who's going to be ranked from that?
And even then, Miami will probably lose another game or 2. North Carolina might be ranked. I mean, that's kind of a stretch. Maybe Virginia Tech.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, they'll probably have 1 or 2 losses and probably be ranked 22nd in the country. So, I mean, that's really not impressive. I mean, Cincinnati has just as good as a resume, I'm sure, by that point. Then Clemson.
And you have victories over Notre Dame and Indiana if you're Cincinnati. And if they went undefeated, they also beat UCF, who's also 26 in the poll right now. So
yeah. I mean, I totally agree. I think you got to go Bryce Young 1. I think you got to go Matt Corral 2. I guess to kind of pick a third one, because after that, I think it starts becoming a little bit more unclear. I mean, if I actually expect Bryce Young to win it. If he doesn't win it, though, I could kind of see it happening like last year, and I could see someone like John Mechie if he breaks out and has a crazy rest of his year. But if they don't want to give it to a freshman for some reason, because there's always kind of politics played in there, and if they want to make it 2 years in a row for a wide receivers thing, I could see Mechie doing it. I could see Mechie pulling it off. And I think, honestly, I think he has a better chance of it at this point than someone like Spencer Rattler does. I mean, Rattler's looked average so far.
Mhm.
I mean, I would definitely agree with the first two. I think Bryce Young right this second, you'd have to put him as the top just because, I mean, number one team in the country. He's been playing absolutely amazing. Granted, they've played a poor Miami team and Mercer. So, I mean, we'll see what happens when he gets in some SEC play. I mean, I'm sure he'll have hiccups here and there. He's a true redshirt freshman, but I definitely think he has potential to at least be in New York at the end of the season. Matt Corral potentially could be the favorite right this second as well. I mean, he's been slinging it. Ole Miss looks really good. Their defense looks solid, so that just helps the offense even more. But someone I had that maybe a little spicy, based off of his experience in a road game this past weekend, I think Anthony Brown out of Oregon, the old transfer from Boston College, may start getting some votes here shortly. I mean, he played well in the shoe, which is a pretty hard place to play. I mean, he went 17 for 35, 240 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and about 65 yards rushing. So I mean, he had a good game. His QBR was about 78. So, I mean, that's impressive. I think that if he keeps that up, again, in the big games, I mean, that's where it matters the most. How do you perform in the big game? That's what a lot of people from the Heisman voting room are going to be looking at. How well do you perform? Not, against FCS schools as well, but, I mean, the big games that where all the eyes are on. So we'll see. I mean, that's kind of a little spicy, but just if he keeps performing like that, his name may be thrown in the pot a little bit.
Yeah. For you, Colton, I'd also talk about JT Daniels if they can upset Alabama or something like that. I mean, you never know.
Yeah, JT Daniels could be thrown in there too. I mean, I sincerely think a oblique injury he had, and I think he suffered that in the Clemson game, and they just kind of kept it hush-hush. I mean, and Georgia wasn't really throwing it downfield because they knew their defense was going to be able to hold Clemson. That's just kind of my take on that. We'll see when Georgia gets fully healthy and Daniels is back how good the offense can be. But yeah, I mean, I would say he's up there too. I mean, a lot of good quarterbacks as usual. So it's going to be interesting how the season shakes out.
Definitely.
All right. So last thing, rapid fire. If you had to pick one guy, who wins it?
Bryce Young.
Right this second, I'd probably pick Matt Corral at Ole Miss. Their first Heisman Trophy winner. If I just had to throw a name out there off the top of my head, who I think is on that trajectory.
What about you?
I actually think Ritter. I really do. I think that Cincinnati can get undefeated. And I know I picked UCF to beat Cincinnati, but I'm getting less and less confident about that as I see Cincinnati play, and they keep looking better and better.
That's spicy.
It's fair.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
spicy.
We're going to wrap it up tonight. Hope you all watch the NFL podcast. Will be coming out pretty soon as well. And until next week, peace.
See ya.